My name is Sophia Winters, and I did my senior project on everything you need to know about rabies and canine distemper. So first we're going to go through a little bit of background on these two diseases and why I chose to do this topic. Rabies and canine distemper are two commonly confused diseases. Overall, the rates of rabies in humans have decreased by 4.8% from 2012 to 2013, but there are still cases of humans being infected with rabies, and therefore it is still a problem, lack of information about this disease. There are similar symptoms in these two diseases, although they manifest in the body differently and have different communicabilities. Not only is there confusion differentiating between the two diseases, but diagnosis of the diseases in general. This is due to misconceptions, which I will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. The information about these diseases is not only relative for vets and those working in the wildlife community, but for the general public. This is because we are all sharing the planet with these animals, and most of us have pets, and therefore it is very realistic that at some point in our lives we may come into contact with one or both of these diseases, and it's important to understand them and know what to do. In 2020 in North Carolina, there was a law change regarding certified wildlife rehabilitators. In January of this year, it became legal for certified wildlife rehabilitators to rehabilitate rabies vector species as long as they have previously been rehabilitating animals for 3 years and apply and receive the permit for these rabies vector species. Now, what is a rabies vector species? I'm going to go into that more in further slides, but for right now, we'll just go ahead and say that the rabies vector species in North Carolina are raccoons, foxes, bats, skunks, and coyotes. Wildlife rehabilitators in North Carolina estimated that 80% of their peers were rehabbing rabies vector species before it was legalized. What this means is whether it's legal or not, rehabilitating of these species is happening, and therefore there is a heightened risk to the community of rabies, both through those finders who find these orphaned or injured rabies vector species and are taking them to rehabbers, and just people living in the community in general. We know that there's a skewed understanding of rabies and canine distemper right now. A study found that those with 4-year degrees, females, and individuals who reported never having or knowing anyone with exposure to rabies, plague, or West Nile virus have a lower risk of disease than other demographics. In order to better serve our wildlife, pets, and better protect ourselves, it is essential the general public, as well as wildlife professionals, understand the similarities and differences of canine distemper and rabies. It is extremely important that we close this gap of information based on demographics so that everyone has the same access to information and the same proper information on the disease. So what is the general public do you need to know? First off, how prevalent is rabies and canine distemper? Canine distemper does not have any specific rates for North Carolina, but I was able to find a study done in the United States on 3,000 wild and domestic animals tested for rabies. These animals were tested for rabies between 2014 and 2018, and only 6 to 8% of these animals which were turned in for testing were positive. The other ones either had canine distemper or were not actually sick, and it was just wrong reporting due to misconceptions surrounding the disease. Of the 1,240 striped skunks submitted for rabies testing, 69% of them were positive. Again, the other ones either were turned in and tested due to misconceptions and wrong reporting, or they actually had canine distemper. Rabies between January 1st, 2019 and January 1st, 2020 in North Carolina, there were 230 confirmed cases. This included 22 bat cases, 3 bobcat cases, 20 cat cases, 11 cow cases, 1 deer case, 42 fox cases, 1 confirmed goat case, 82 raccoon cases, and 48 skunk cases, all confirmed positive for rabies. So what are the causes and the risks of these diseases? Both diseases are viral diseases. Canine distemper cannot be transmitted to humans, while rabies can be transmitted to humans. Rabies is transmitted through direct contact with saliva or brain/nervous system tissue from the infected animal. So this could happen from someone being bitten and saliva getting into the bite, saliva getting into a scratch someone previously has, or saliva getting into a human's mucous membranes, such as their eyes or their nose. There's no cure for either disease, and both are fatal, although rabies has been estimated to spread more quickly than canine distemper. A study was done in northern Italy on a red fox population, and those doing the study estimated that every 3 days there was a new case of rabies, whereas there was a new case of canine distemper only about once a week. So, like I said, we'd come back to it. What is a rabies vector species, or as they're commonly known, RVS? All mammals can contract rabies, but specific species are reservoirs for the disease. What this means is that distinct rabies virus strains have been found in these animals, and those animals are bats, raccoons, skunks, foxes, and mongoose. These are rabies vector species, but also what gets classified as rabies vector species is other animals which are known to regularly or commonly contract rabies, such as coyotes. So what are the symptoms of these diseases? Symptoms of canine distemper include weakness, fever, nasal and/or eye discharge, vomiting, diarrhea, eye inflammation, seizures, paralysis, fluid in the lungs, and death. With rabies, the virus first starts out with symptoms of restlessness, anorexia, difficulty swallowing, vomiting, and diarrhea. Vomiting and diarrhea you'll see is in both is symptoms of both diseases, followed in 1 to 2 days by problems with balance, excessive aggression, salivation, incoordination, appearing tame or lack of fear, self-mutilation, agitation, head tilt, or even death. Both diseases have neurological symptoms, and that's another reason why they can be highly confused. Even though rabies does have a more tame expression of symptoms, there's also the aggressive expression of symptoms, and the aggressive symptoms usually occur 80% of the time, whereas the appearing tame or lack of fear symptoms usually occur around 20% of the time. It should be noted that just because an animal is not showing all of these symptoms does not mean that they do not have one or both diseases. It could be any combination of these symptoms. So how do you protect yourself and your family? First off, you'll want to avoid wild animals and be especially cautious if an animal is acting out of the ordinary. You'll want to vaccinate your pets as recommended by your vet, and when you have your pets outside, you'll want to keep an eye on them to see what animals they're interacting with, whether those are, or whether your pet has their vaccinations or not. So how do you help an injured or orphaned rabies vector species? First off, you do not want to have any direct contact if you have not had your pre-exposure rabies vaccine. If the animal isn't showing symptoms, even if it does have the disease, it is not yet contagious. So that can give you some peace of mind, but that does not mean you should not take steps to minimize your risk. Infants with eyes closed, latex gloves will be sufficient, but those with eyes open, you should use thick gloves or towel/blanket to touch or hold the animal. Young raccoons can be scruffed as shown in this photo below, and it's probably one of the easiest ways to move them from where you found them into some kind of container. You'll want to put the animal in a cat carrier or a box with a lid. If it's an infant, you'll want to place the entire carrier on a heating pad set on low and immediately contact your nearest wildlife rehabber. If it's an injured animal, you can try to do a live trap with it, or if you can set something over top of it to keep it from moving. A list of certified rehabbers in North Carolina is available on the Wildlife Rehabilitators of North Carolina website or ncwildlife.org. So how do you help an injured or orphaned animal showing symptoms of distemper or rabies? First off, do not approach the animal unless you at the very least have had your pre-exposure rabies vaccine. And even then, if you have had your vaccine, if you're not a trained professional, it's best to wait for help. Contact animal control or a local rehabber to come assist you. Keep an eye on the animal and take notes to tell the rehabber or control personnel when they arrive. If you choose to capture the animal in a live trap, do not approach the trap until help arrives. If the animal has been trapped and is docile, you can cover it with a towel or blanket and take it to a local rehabber, but because you still have the risk of being bitten through the bars, it is encouraged to wait for help. What are some common misconceptions which can lead to misdiagnosis? If there is a known outbreak near me, all wildlife around me is now a threat. Often rabies and canine distemper outbreaks are based off of human encounters and reporting and not testing. This can be highlighted in a study done in Brazil where roadkill was collected in an area of distemper and rabies outbreak. It was expected that most of these animals would have rabies or canine distemper since they have neurological symptoms and could cause an animal to be more likely to get hit by a car. All 18 animals tested negative for both diseases. This does not necessarily mean that there isn't an outbreak, but it does lend you to wonder if possibly there isn't an outbreak at all, and this is just error in reporting. Rabies vector species that are normally nocturnal out during the day must have rabies. Although this can be the case, and if you see an animal that is normally nocturnal out during the day acting oddly or displaying any symptoms, or you have any doubts in general, you should contact animal control or a rehabber. This isn't always the case. It could either be raising young and was unable to gather enough necessary food the night before and is now continuing to forage during the day, or it could have woken up and be going out to get a drink or go to the bathroom before going back to sleep. Thirdly, an animal has either rabies or canine distemper, never both. A study in Canada showed that 69% of raccoons with rabies also tested positive for canine distemper. 21% of striped skunks positive for rabies also tested positive for canine distemper. The takeaway note is that it's better to assume that it's rabies and be wrong, or it be both, than to assume distemper. This is because if you assume rabies, then you're taking your precautions, but if you assume distemper and it turns out to be wrong, or it turns out to be both diseases, then you've put yourself at risk and you'll have to go through treatment and the animal will have to be killed to be tested for rabies. Lastly, opossums can contract rabies. Rarely are possums diagnosed due to their low body temperature. Their body temperature is actually so low that it does not allow the virus to survive. Lastly, where can you find additional information/direct questions? The best source is a local wildlife rehabber. I mentioned the websites before, which you can find a list of rehabbers on, but in addition to that, the International Wildlife Rehabilitators Council has a list by country and state. A Google search for wildlife rehabilitator centers near me or wildlife hospitals near me can also help you find a local rehabber. Lastly, Animal Help Now is an app to help you find a local rehabber, and it also has resources on the app for other information. I hope that I have answered any questions you could have about rabies and canine distemper, but I encourage you to do more research and reach out if you do have questions or concerns.